Tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you for being at today's webinar by the Aotearoa Circle. Ko Nadine Tokowenua, and I am the Comms and Engagement Director for the Circle, who will be your MC for today. Today we're going to be discussing local government's critical role in restoring nature and reaching our climate goals. This is going to be featuring speakers from Auckland Council, Wellington City Council and Local Government New Zealand, also known as LGNZ. By way of background, under the RMA, local government must consider the effects of climate change on communities. It's also required to incorporate climate change into their existing frameworks. You know, this consideration is now integrated into activities such as flood management, water resources, planning, building, regulations and transport. And here at the Aotearoa Circle, as we progress our work streams, it's becoming clearer and clearer just how important yet understated local government's role is when it comes to climate action and restoring nature. And I think there's a lot to learn in this space. So, you know, throughout our work streams, there are recommendations in korero that point to the critical role that local government plays. Examples include native tree restoration, as highlighted in our native forest report, or in the low carbon energy roadmap, where local government is identified as a key agency that can reduce private vehicle travel through PT and also play a really critical role in data gathering. One more tangible example is with the Manakai initiative, where the Waikato Regional Council are at the development stage of a comprehensive regional kai challenge and are leveraging the Manakai framework using insights from both the Purpose and Values report and the priority actions. And these intersections are really significant. So I'm pleased to today have key representatives in the local government space to talk about this in more detail. Today I'm joined by Grace Hall, Director of Policy and Advocacy at LGNZ. I'm joined by Matthew Blaikie, Chief Sustainability Officer at Auckland Council, and Alison Howard, the Manager of Climate Change Response at Wellington City Council. Also, a quick hello to our guardians that are online today. I think I spotted Larissa Cooney as an RSVP, but if any of you are on the call, welcome. Nice to have you here. Please do pop questions in the chat throughout, and we're going to have a question section at the end. We'll have a decent amount of time to put some good questions to the people that we've got here today, so do continue to put those through in the chat as each speaker speaks, and we'll address them at the end. I'll start off with a mihi and then we will get into it. Tokua te wairoa, mana e whakahau manu, e whakaora te rerehua, o Aotearoa mō ngā uri whakahiki. He aratiki I a mātou mahi, me tā mātou whainga, matua ki hono, ai te era tangata ki te taio. Toea mai rā te kaha me te ngā kaupono, kia hautu tahi ai tātou, ki ngā awha arahi, kia ora ake te ao tukupu. Kia poipoia mō ake tono atu whakamaua, kia tina hui e tae kie. And that translates to release the spirit to restore Aotearoa's natural beauty for future generations, to guide our work and purpose in connecting people with the environment. Let us draw in strength and integrity to meet the headwinds of today and lead for a better planet, ensuring it is nurtured forever. United we affirm. Without further ado, I welcome Grace Hall to give us the bigger picture regarding what local governments are doing in this space. Over to you, Grace.
Kia ora Nadine and kia ora koutou, ko Grace Hall tōku ingoa. As Nadine has said, I'm LGNZ's Director of Policy and Advocacy. Look, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak and to be here with you all today, and apologies from our Chief Executive, Susan Freeman-Green, who would have liked to be here but has another commitment. So I've actually had two stints at LGNZ, and it was during my first stint that I was responsible for leading the work that we were doing on climate change and resilience. So it's really great to see a number of familiar names and faces on this call today. Look, I just want to briefly start by acknowledging the Aotearoa Circle's leadership in this space. And I also really want to acknowledge Alison and Matthew, who are both huge contributors to local government's leadership in the climate change space. And certainly I think local government is incredibly lucky to have the two of them. So look, I've been asked to talk a bit today about some of what local government is doing in this space. but also to talk about what local government New Zealand is doing in this space as well. So, I mean, when I was thinking about this, it was hard not to think about the fact that it's only March, and already so many parts of the country have been battered by significant weather events in such a short space of time. And look, we know that there's a huge amount of work going on right across the country, with huge input by local government right now in terms of responding to those events that have gone on. And I actually think those events have been a bit of a wake-up call for local government. And it's not that local government hasn't known that climate change is a significant issue for some time now, because it has. But I think the severity of those recent events, and also the number of councils that are actually experiencing them simultaneously, has really put the gravity of the challenge that we are facing as a nation into perspective for councils and their communities. And look, I think what it's really done is actually forced councils to consider and take stock of the huge amount of work that we need to do as a sector to address climate change and to build communities' resilience. So we actually brought together quite recently all of the rural and provincial councils together for a 2-day meeting in Wellington, and probably unsurprisingly, climate resilience and how we respond to and recover from extreme weather events was the prominent topic of conversation across the 2 days. And, you know, of course, we heard some pretty harrowing stories about what has happened, as well as some heartening ones too, about the way that communities really band together in times like these. But what really struck me across that two-day meeting was a real and quite palpable desire to use these recent events as a catalyst for change, in a sense that we can't just revert to our old ways of doing and being. But I think that, you know, that feels like the perpetual challenge for all of us, how we actually change our behavior and change our ways of doing and being after crisis events to actually address some of those really long-term and gnarly issues that we face as a country. And look, you know, we've seen that after earthquakes, we saw that after the COVID-19 pandemic. We're all really good during our response phase. We do some really good stuff around recovery, but the issue becomes how prepared we are to actually change and tackle these challenges head on. You know, how prepared are we to actually make some tough decisions to make sure that our communities are resilient to the changing climate? So that's going to be a challenge for councils, and it's going to need to be a real focus for us. So that kind of brings me to the role that LGNZ plays in the climate change and resilience space. And for those of you who are not so familiar with Local Government New Zealand or LGNZ, we're the membership body that represents all 78 of New Zealand's councils. And we do a bunch of things. We advocate for our member councils, we promote the good governance of councils, and do things like provide business support, advice and training to our members. And I suspect that many of you will know that previously LGNZ had been quite active in the climate change and resilience space. And we've across a period of time, you know, have done a number of things like creating a Mayor's Declaration on Climate Change. We did a big research project to identify the types and value of local government-owned infrastructure that was exposed to sea level rise. We produced various pieces of guidance for councils on things like risk assessments and how to engage with communities on adaptation options. And we were working really closely with the government around things like the development of the Zero Carbon Act and the first National Climate Change Risk Assessment, the guidance for councils on doing risk assessments, and then the work that the government was doing for a time on community resilience as well. But look, our work on climate change and resilience did actually taper off for a bit from 2020, when our focus really shifted first into supporting councils through COVID-19, and then supporting councils to respond to the significant package of reform that this government is advancing. So look, like others, what we've really learned is the lesson of how easy it becomes to focus on the issues of the day at the expense of the longer term challenges that require really sustained and committed attention. So I do want to acknowledge that LGNZ has been a bit missing in action over the past couple of years, and that many elected members and council officers have actually continued to show really strong leadership during that time and really stepped up. But what I am pleased to say is that our National Council, which is our governing body made up of elected members from across the motu, has recently agreed that LGNZ will ramp up its focus on climate change and resilience again. We're really excited about that, and we're really committed actually to engaging with our members and with other key stakeholders to find out what they think it is that we can do in this space that will add the most value for councils, but fundamentally for communities. And what I'm really interested in kind of thinking about with our members and stakeholders is, what can LGNZ do to lead in this space? What can we do to advocate on behalf of local government? And what can we also do to support the significant amount of work that's already underway without duplicating others' efforts? And look, it is just that work that other councils are doing on climate change that I briefly want to touch on now, and certainly Alison and Matthew will talk to the great work going on in Auckland and Wellington. You'll know many councils have done risk assessments, many are starting to develop or implement fairly ambitious climate change and resilience strategies and action plans. We've seen some really good work in South Dunedin around the future of South Dunedin work. There's been work in the Hawke's Bay around the Clifton to Tangoio coastal hazards strategy. Christchurch City Council doing heaps of work around a coastal hazards adaptation planning program, and actually they've recently established a coastal panel that's made up of community and Runanga members to consider adaptation options for their Littleton Harbour and Port Levy areas. We've had regional and unitary councils working really consistently around proposals for central government co-investment in flood protection infrastructure, and then a number of councils looking at things like emissions reduction targets and ways that they can reduce their own emissions and support their communities to do the same. And we've also seen the emergence of a number of really strong networks in local government. So the Aotearoa Climate Adaptation Network, that's been established by Tom Fitzgerald at Northland Regional Council and Jeff Farrell at Whakatane District Council, and that's a collective of over 100 council staff working in adaptation-focused roles that's coming together regularly to connect on critical issues and share best practice. And there's a similar network of council staff that are in roles focused on mitigation and sustainability that's been set up and supported by Tony Moore at Christchurch City Council. So look, there's lots going on, but I guess there's always scope to do more. And that's something that we really recognise. So as we're looking to ramp up our own work at LGNZ, we're thinking about how we can draw on all of that great work that's already underway, but equally, what additional value we can add. So look, I'm really excited about that work, really looking forward to connecting with our members and also with other stakeholders in the coming weeks to get their input around what that work might look like. Because, fundamentally my view, LGNZ's view, is that local government must be a key leader if New Zealand is to meet its climate change goals. So that's enough from me for now, but thanks so much for the opportunity and looking forward to the discussion. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Thank you so much, Grace. That was, super insightful to see where those regional councils in particular, what they're thinking, and where their thinking is at on how we build back better, and also just to hear about all that tangible policy happening up and down New Zealand at a local council level. Very exciting. Remember to please put any questions in the chat and we'll make sure to get to them at the end. So yes, please do pop them in the chat. I will now hand over to Auckland Council's Chief Sustainability Officer, Matthew Blaikie.
Tēnā koutou katoa, I mahi ana au, hey Chief Sustainability Officer ki te kaunihira o Tāmaki Makaurau, ko Matthew Blaikie tōku ingoa. Hello everyone, and thank you very much for the opportunity to join you today. It's great to be here to share some of the work we're doing at Auckland Council, and thank you to the Aotearoa Circle for the opportunity to present. I have a short slide deck for you, and I'm hoping to share some insights in terms of the work we're doing at Auckland Council in terms of our approach to restoring nature and reaching our climate goals. And also I plan to talk through a specific example in terms of the climate action targeted rates that we have at Auckland Council. So first of all, I thought it'd be useful to talk through a bit of a roadmap in terms of Auckland Council's work on climate action. And so I'll just talk through this very briefly. So in 2015, Auckland Council joined C40 Cities, a group of cities, global cities dedicated to bold action on climate change. And we're still a member of a member of C40 Cities to this day. In 2018, the Auckland Plan 2050 outlined climate change as one of the key challenges for Auckland. In 2019, Auckland Council declared a climate emergency. And following that, in the emergency budget, following the first COVID lockdowns, there was a dedicated funding for foundation actions for climate action. In December of 2020, we adopted Te Taraki Atawhiri, Auckland's climate plan, setting out our regional goals to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 50% by 2030 and take a precautionary approach to planning for change. Following that, we adopted our 10-year budget, our long-term plan, with a dedicated climate action package for the first time. So this was $152 million of funding outlined for climate action across a range of initiatives for the region. That funding was really focused on accelerating climate action across a range of activities, but recognizing that much more needed to be done. I've also noted on here some of the key legislation released from central government, such as the Emissions Reduction Plan and the National Adaptation Plan on the right-hand side there. We developed and adopted the Climate Action Targeted Rates in June of 2022, I believe it was. So time frames are a little bit fuzzy due to the last few years, but 2022. Which recognised the need to increase funding for climate action, and I will come on to that in a little bit more detail shortly. And then last year we adopted the Transport Emissions Reduction Pathway, which really gives effect to the transport element of Te Taraki Atawhiri and outlines in some detail the actions that we need to take to transition our transport system to one that is low emissions, but also delivers really compelling co-benefits across the region, in improving equity, improving safety, improving productivity and quality of life as well. So really recognising those co-benefits that climate action can deliver. And in terms of our progress, you'll see on the bottom right there, we report on our progress every year. So 2022, in September of 2022, a progress report was published, and that is publicly available on climateakl.co.nz, which is also the website address for Te Taraki Atawhiri. I'm going to touch on Te Taraki Atawhiri over the next few slides and also come on to the climate action targeted rate. So in terms of Te Taraki Atawhiri, which is our regional climate action plan, I'll just outline the structure of it and in terms of what it consists of. So the first thing to note is that Te Taraki Atawhiri was developed in partnership with Mana Whenua through the Mana Whenua Kaitiaki Forum at the time. And it really takes a Tāmaki Makaurau response, and this is foundational to Te Taraki Atawhiri. And a Tāmaki Makaurau response is really reflecting the unique nature of Tāmaki Makaurau. It's reflecting this place and the response that needs to be reflective of this place and the conditions of Tāmaki Makaurau. And in particular, it looks at a Te Ora o Tāmaki Makaurau well-being framework developed by Mana Whenua that really recognises the importance of well-being and the importance of well-being across taiao, whenua and tangata in terms of the well-being across the environment, the land and the people, and how that needs to be very much central to our response in terms of climate action, and how we can enhance the mauri of those three elements through our response. It also looks at a rangatahi voice in terms of how we give a voice to rangatahi, to youth, to lead on climate action, and also reflecting on the fact that they are the ones that will inherit the future. So they deserve and need a strong position in this kaupapa. Recognising that climate action is a vehicle to deliver multiple benefits across the region. It's not just about emissions reduction and adaptation, and also putting equity at the centre of what we do. So recognising that equity and climate action need to go hand in hand, and we need to be improving equity when taking climate action. So we need inclusive, equitable climate action. And that really frames up our Tāmaki Makaurau response. We also have two overriding objectives in terms of reducing emissions, mitigation, so reducing our emissions by 50% by 2030 and transitioning to net zero by 2050. And then also in terms of adaptation, taking a precautionary approach to planning for change. There's 8 priorities within Te Taraki a Tāwhiri in terms of priority action areas with sub-actions sitting under those. So natural environment, built environment, transport, economy, communities and coast, Te Pua Waitanga o Te Tātai, energy and industry and food. And it's worth noting that Te Pua Waitanga o Te Tātai is a principles-based priority. So it goes across all of the others, and it's very much focused on how we embed Te Ao Māori principles and Mataranga Māori into our climate action response. One of the things I wanted to touch on is that Te Taraki a Tāwhiri calls for us to reframe, reimagine and reset the current system, and to shift from a human-centred approach to an ecological-centred approach. And this is very much central to the approach that we took working with Mana Whenua, and this is across Te Taraki a Tāwhiri. But I also wanted to just touch on one of the actions within the natural environment area, action area N1, which is focused on building the resilience of Auckland's Indigenous biodiversity, habitats and ecosystems to the impacts of climate change. And you can see the sub-actions there on the right-hand side. One of the things I want to just flag here is that there's an acknowledgement and a strong connection between the need to enhance and restore natural capital and deliver a strong and effective climate action response. So it's very much central to Te Taraki a Tāwhiri that we need to restore and enhance the natural environment in order to deliver a successful climate action response. Those two things go hand in hand, and I wanted to just highlight that as a key part of the natural capital response that we have, and obviously that being of interest to the Aotearoa Circle. In terms of implementing Te Taraki a Tāwhiri and the role of Auckland Council, it's very clear that Te Taraki a Tāwhiri is a plan for the region. We developed in partnership with Mana Whenua, but it is not a plan for Auckland Council to deliver alone. Collaboration and partnerships need to be central to our climate action response if we are going to deliver on our climate goals. We need to work together, and we need to think about new ways of working as well in terms of how we accelerate that climate action response. Auckland Council has a number of roles to play, but cannot deliver on the plan alone. And I've identified there on the right-hand side some of the roles that Auckland Council has, and we see this in terms of 5 key roles. So in the centre there, you can see that we facilitate. So we facilitated the development of Te Taraki a Tāwhiri. Te Taraki a Tāwhiri is a regional plan and should be delivered by many stakeholders and partners across the region. We facilitated its development with significant engagement from stakeholders and partners across the region. We have a role to play in terms of that facilitation, but also in terms of the facilitation of climate action. We're a non-commercial entity, and we have the ability to bring people together to work towards a common purpose. On the top left there, we have a role to advocate to central government, for example, a role to advocate to business, to create the changes that we need. And certainly we have a key role in terms of that advocating to central government around policy, for example. We have a role to partner, so partnering with different organisations, partnering with central government on the successful delivery of climate action. On the bottom right there, we can lead. We need to show leadership in terms of what we do as Auckland Council, recognising our role and scale within the region. So what can we do to lead, and what can we do to influence in terms of supply chains, in terms of procurement, in terms of sustainable finance, what we choose to invest in. And we can also look to own. So there are actions in Te Taraki Atafi that we own and are directly responsible for, and we have a commitment to deliver on those. I wanted to give you a very quick run through of the Climate Action Targeted Rate, which is one of the key initiatives that we've worked on in recent years. Also want to acknowledge Nadine's involvement whilst working at the Mayor's Office in developing and delivering the Climate Action Targeted Rate. A huge step forward for climate action in Tāmaki Makaurau, but not a silver bullet, and an indication that we need to do more. So what is the Climate Action Targeted Rate? It's a targeted rate for accelerating the delivery of climate action in Tāmaki Makaurau and raising additional revenue for climate action. When we developed the Climate Action Targeted Rate, we based it on 4 key criteria, or 4 key guiding principles, if you like. It needed to be high impact, it needed to deliver wide regional benefits, it needed to address inequity, and it needed to invest in programs that could be started fast. So there was 3 key themes to it. Public transport, very much focused on significantly increasing both the coverage and frequency of bus services, and also replacing our aging ferry fleet with low emission and zero emission vessels. The active network focused on delivering an increase in walking and cycling infrastructure, connecting Aucklanders to areas conveniently and safely. And then also our urban ngāhere, so really focused on how we can plant trees now to prepare for a warmer future and reducing vulnerability to extreme heat. So really looking at our canopy cover and how we can address inequitable canopy cover across the region. In terms of the bus element of the Climate Action Targeted Rate, this is the most significant area of the package. And you can see there that the improvements are distributed across the region. In a nutshell, it includes 10 new frequent services serving Franklin, South Auckland, Orake, Tamaki, Onehunga to Mount Roskill, New Lynn and West Auckland. But it also extends frequent services on the Northern Express to Hibiscus Coast Station in terms of frequency. 69 other bus routes will be improved in terms of their frequency. So that might be taking a bus service that runs every half an hour to 15 minutes, for example. So improvements to more than half of the bus services in Auckland currently. 79 additional electric or hydrogen buses would be added to the fleet to ensure those new services are zero tailpipe emissions. In summary, the improved services would be available to more than 1 million Aucklanders, so significantly increasing the frequency and coverage of bus services, and 170,000 more people would be brought within 500 metres of a frequent bus route. What we're trying to achieve here is delivering a bus service, a bus transport system that is frequent, convenient and appealing so that people can turn up at a bus stop without having to think too much about the timetable, knowing that a bus service will be arriving shortly. In terms of the ferries, we're looking at procuring 6 to 7 additional low emission ferries. So these are ferries that are reaching the end of their life. So rather than replacing those ferries with fossil fuel ferries, which would lock in emissions for decades to come, replacing those ferries with either zero emission or low emission ferries to ensure that those services can be run with low emission ferries, and also the wharf upgrades and charging infrastructure to enable that to occur. In terms of cycling and walking, there's investment to complete key links in the separate cycling network, including connections to schools and jobs in the North Shore, Manurewa, Onehunga, Hobsonville and New Lynn. So this is very much focused on making those key connections and establishing infrastructure that is safe and convenient. I would just like to acknowledge that this goes nowhere near close enough to delivering the cycling network that Auckland needs, but it is one step closer to what Auckland needs. But significant investment and significant focus on effective delivery is required if we are going to create a network and realise the benefits of a network effect that cycling can deliver. In terms of walking, this is the first time that we've got a business case focused on walking connectivity improvements, so up to 35 kilometres of walking connectivity improvements, to ensure that people have convenient and safe connections to places they want to go. So this focus on improvements to footpaths, pedestrian crossings, improved accessibility, and also a targeted investment in Manurewa, looking at really improving the safety and ease of walking in Manurewa as a particular area of focus, and you can see that on the bottom right there. But the other blue areas are also additional areas that have been been identified for targeted investment, but further funding would be needed to achieve that. In terms of the urban ngahere, and it was great to hear the focus earlier on the Aotearoa Circle's native forest planting. The proposal here is to plant street and park trees in areas that need them most to respond to the projections around increasing temperature in the future. So this is about creating resilience to extreme heat and to an increased number of hot days that we are predicted to have in the future. Across Auckland, the distribution of canopy cover is inequitable. You can see on the map here, green is the highest canopy cover, red is the lowest. What we would be focusing on here is planting trees in areas with the lowest canopy cover that also are the areas with highest heat vulnerability. So nearly 15,000 trees. These are trees, native trees of around 2 meters tall, being planted in streets and parks, but also over 4,000 trees or plants for additional urban ngahere interventions such as tiny forests, food forests, and marakai and bush remnants being expanded across Auckland, and also grants for rongoa planting across the region in terms of rongoa planting for traditional use of native plants. This is my final slide. I appreciate it's a quick run through, but we've got constraint on time. My final slide is really just to focus on the role of Auckland Council in terms of serving the communities of Auckland. And Nadine's mentioned our role in terms of the RMA, in terms of what we're required to do as Auckland Council. One other way of looking at this is how we need to serve the communities of Auckland. And this is an extract from a public perception survey that was run in 2019, so about 4 years out of date now. But this really indicated the level of support for climate action in Auckland. And you can see here that it's identifying the 42% see a need for more radical change, and 36% see a need for medium change. So based on this, we can see that there is a majority support for change in Auckland. And also at the bottom there, you can see the overriding majority are supporting, are willing to take a change to their lifestyle to ensure we meet our climate commitments, either more radical change or medium change. So I just wanted to flag this, as I think this is just important to note that we have clearly a direction on climate action and we need to deliver on our climate commitments, but we're also responding to what we're hearing from Aucklanders in terms of their desire for climate action and the need for change and their willingness to change. And the last thing I will say just on this note is that clearly when we are considering climate action at Auckland Council, I've outlined a number of investment packages, the LTP, the Climate Action Targeted Rate. These are additional investment packages or funding for climate action. But what is essential and fundamental to the success of climate action in Tāmaki Makaurau is that climate action is considered in everything we do. So when we develop our next long-term plan or 10-year budget, climate action shouldn't be seen as an add-on or an investment package on top of BAU. It fundamentally needs to be a foundation that guides every investment decision and every priority we take at Auckland Council to inform decision making and ensure that we invest in the right activities to promote a just transition to a low carbon resilient future. And on that note, I would just encourage all of you that are in Auckland to consider the annual budget proposal and to have your say on the big changes that are proposed in the annual budget, and to provide feedback so that that feedback is considered as part of the development of the final annual budget proposal. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Thank you, Matthew, and for that plug at the end, very good. I think the piece that really stood out to me was the shared commitment, you know, across industries and across sectors to get this work done, and that although Auckland Council has progressed the assessment and what we need to do, that it is clear that we all need to do our bit. So I thought that was really compelling. Next up, last but definitely not least, we have Alison Howard, our Manager of Climate Change Response at Wellington City Council. Over to you, Alison.
Kia ora. Thanks for having me, Nadine. I really appreciate the opportunity to wax lyrical about local government. and very interesting, Grace and Matthew, to hear your talks. My apologies if I seem a bit foggy today. I'm on the tail end of COVID, so bear with me. When I was preparing for this talk, I have no slides. I was thinking about what the intersection is between climate action and natural capital. That's a topic that's come up internally recently. In 2019, councillors had told staff that they wanted to declare a climate emergency, and so we had prepared through a community consultation and engagement process Te Aotearoa, which is a climate action plan to deal with the climate emergency. And then at a reasonably late stage in the piece, councillors changed it to a climate and ecological emergency that they were declaring. And it's kind of left, I think, a structure of policy at council that that still treats those two things separately. So we have Te Aotearoa, which mentions some aspects of the ecological emergency, but we have other pieces of work that deal with other parts of the ecological emergency, if that makes sense. So we've got a biodiversity strategy, we have a zero waste strategy. So it's not an all-encompassing kind of single piece of work, which sometimes has advantages in local governments and sometimes has disadvantages. But where I think those intersections are, and then I'll talk a bit about the role of Wellington City Council in delivering on those. So firstly, climate change has obvious impacts on natural capital, both extreme weather events and also the changing in seasonal patterns that changes how ecosystems perform and where they're located. And with intense urbanisation, we've restricted habitat's ability to move and shift into different weather patterns. It also is very obvious that the same drivers of the climate emergency are driving the ecological emergency. So when you tackle the climate emergency, you are also helping with the ecological emergency, because it's the same things that we're trying to shift. It's population growth and it's the increase in demand that places on land for food, land for housing, resources, increased consumption. So tackling all of those things, I'm not saying tackling population, but tackling those things both helps reduce the amount of fossil fuel consumption, but also helps take the pressure off ecological systems at the same time. So it is kind of an interconnected set of challenges. But the great thing about that is that the solutions then have multiple benefits across multiple sustainable development goals and across both climate change and ecology. And also, so I just wanted to kind of point that out, because I think often when climate action is talked about with natural capital, it's how natural capital can be of service to climate action as opposed to the other way around. And those ways are well understood. Both natural capital can provide sequestration and withdraw carbon from the atmosphere, although not in a terribly, it's not as a long-term solution. And natural capital can also help with adaptation, and a lot of natural ecosystem-based solutions can be more effective as adaptation measures. And again, serve multiple benefits at the same time. So I just wanted to sort of preface at the start my thoughts on how those two things interact, and then talk a bit about Wellington City Council. I've only been in local government for just over 2 years, and I really love it. And I love it because it is where policy becomes so real and tangible. Local government holds the relationships with people, and it is where communities come to negotiate how they are going to occupy place and what their society is going to look like in a practical, everyday kind of sense. And I don't think I had any understanding of how much local government was a part of my life until I started working for local government. I sort of took a whole lot of things for granted, like the roads, the seawalls, the libraries, the swimming pools, someone was providing all of that stuff and picking up my rubbish, but I didn't realise that's where my rates went, which I think is something that local government New Zealand is constantly struggling with, trying to raise awareness of that. So anyway, it's a real and tangible place, and a really powerful place from which to take climate action and ecological action. So we're pursuing a wide variety of climate actions. I have no pretty slides like Matthew's, but similarly, we declared a climate emergency in 2019. We passed a budget bid into the long-term plan. We asked for money to fund the implementation of Aotearoa, although the bulk of money allocated in the long-term plan to climate action is for infrastructure, for Let's Get Wellington Moving and for our bike network plan. So the bike network plan is about 250 million, and Let's Get Wellington Moving, which is a proposal for some short-term improvements to transport in the city and long-term a mass rapid transit system through the city. That's like several $1 billion worth. And that's the biggest lever local government has for climate action, is transport and urban form. So we improved urban density through the district plan. So we've changed the settings to allow more urban density to occur and to occur around transport corridors. And then the transport system transformation supports that urban density to be achieved without cars. So that's the cunning plan, and that's the bulk of the plan. And then I call Aotearoa the strategy of everything and the kitchen sink, because it's also about using basically any lever you can think of to try and meet the city's target, which is a science-based target to reduce 2020 emissions by 2030 by 57%. And I was pleased that when we did the city's emissions inventory recently, we had dropped 9% over the last 2 years, but 8 years to go and another, oh, what's that, 48%. So it's, one could say unachievable, but definitely aspirational. There are a variety of actions that we're taking that have that intersection with natural capital. So one that's out for consultation soon, if not at the moment, is our open spaces strategy. We've also released a sustainable food action plan. We're refreshing our biodiversity strategy. We have our town belts and an extensive native regeneration plan. And we also have a green network plan, which is about urban green spaces. And what all of these things kind of have in common is a desire to increase the amount of green and biodiversity that's in the city, but also to make those spaces work harder. So if you're going to increase urban density, you will decrease people's personal backyard space. And so how do you retain the amenity? And so we're finding the pressure on our public spaces is they not only need to do sport, but they also need to do a playground, a community garden, a compost hub, a native regeneration project, and a sports ground, and a nice place to walk through, and a garden bench for an elderly person to sit on and just, you know, hear the birds. So you're trying to make those spaces do about 1,000 things at the same time, which is not always going to be possible, but worth trying for. The other piece I wanted to mention is our zero waste strategy and its intersection with our economic wellbeing strategy. So the economic wellbeing strategy redefines our goal for what we want for the economy of Wellington to be around wellbeing. And one of those is how do we transition to a zero carbon circular economy? And the zero waste strategy is a big part of that. So all of these pieces of strategy work are really asking, how do we change everything about how Wellington operates as a city, what economic sectors it has, how they are redesigned to be fossil free, how our society functions, how we physically live and inhabit this space and retain our sense of connection to the space and to each other. All of those things are things we're grappling with in these strategy pieces. A couple of other things I wanted to just briefly talk about: sequestration, so bringing carbon out of the atmosphere and into forests. We're going pretty well with this, but we don't have a lot of land in the Wellington city area specifically. So council owns about 3,000 hectares of land that's under native forest, and about half of that is post 1889 and is generating carbon credits for us. So we registered everything we could into the ETS, generated a whole lot of carbon credits, and now don't know what to do with them, which I find fascinating, right? When you're talking about trying to protect natural capital, one of the ways is to generate carbon credits from regeneration projects. But then if you sell the units, you've created a liability and you've allowed somebody else to pollute. So I sit here conflicted, sitting on a pile of credits going, I don't know what to do with them other than feel great that we generated them. We have kind of run out of opportunities without purchasing new land. One thing we did do in 2020 that was quite cool is we formed a partnership with Victoria University. They leased a parcel of an 11-hectare parcel of land from us for no money, I think for $1. In return, they give us, they regenerate the land and give us a share of the carbon credits that land will produce in the future. We're also really interested in ecosystem solutions for adaptation, and we note that they are often harder to get across the line, both because they're less well understood, or they've had less evidence and research put into them. And it's easier to just build a seawall. It's like tried and true. I get it, there's a seawall, the sea is held back. But natural solutions are often better. Plus they're tackling both of those emergencies at the same time. So we have 3 key adaptation issues in Wellington. We've got slips on steep slopes, we've got some flooding from some rivers, and we've got coastal storm surges. Also, we've also got inland flooding from just being quite low lying with a stormwater system that doesn't no longer is above high tide. Good times. And so for those issues, giving more space to a river, reforesting a steep slope, regenerating kelp forests, relying on wetlands and dunes, all of those techniques are really good for being able to lessen the impacts of climate change as they come increase for the city. I think I'll stop there because otherwise we will have no time for questions. Thanks.
Oh, kia ora, Alison. Really good contribution. I think what's really interesting is how much thinking Wellington City Council is doing on that interrelation piece between nature and climate change, and also just hearing about how much can be done to bring down our emissions in the transport and urban form parts of Wellington Council's remit. I think it's really good that you guys have got your emissions down 9%, and we have a really long way to go, but I think well done, and obviously that's going to be massively accelerated, but it's at least a good start. We have a lot of questions and 8 minutes to get through them, so I'm extremely apologetic for the ones that we don't get to. I will try and get through them as quickly as I can, so if we could all keep our answers concise, that would be really appreciated. For you, Alison, I suppose what would be good to hear is what you think, and maybe this is a bit of a big question considering I've asked for everyone to be concise, but what do you think are the inhibitors to delivering on the scale of change required at a local government level, you know, off the back of you talking about that 9% and actually how far we've got to go in the next wee while?
I think the biggest barrier to us achieving this goal is that I don't think the general public understand how much needs to change. And I sheet that home squarely to a lack of courage on behalf of successive central governments in really explaining to the New Zealand public how transformative both scenarios are, allowing climate change to run away on us or transforming pretty much everything in order to limit global warming and limit those impacts. Both of those pathways forward are going to change a lot about how New Zealanders live, how our economy is structured, our day-to-day lives, and I don't think that level of awareness has been built. And without that, it's really hard to get even the simplest projects across the line, the amount of pushback you get on cycleways, I just find bewildering. Yes, I'll stop there.
Beautiful. One for you, Matt, from Marjorie, just off the back of your presentation and the walking through all the different parts that Auckland Council is delivering on. She asks, are these budget investments locked in or are they subject to budget cuts?
Yeah, great question. Thank you. So in terms of the investments I talked through, the $152 million climate action package as part of the 10-year budget is subject to proposed budget cuts in the annual budget. In particular, there is a line item that states LTP climate action behaviour change initiatives, such as community sustainability projects. So essentially that is focusing on the area of investment that is related to community sustainability and in particular behaviour change. And obviously behaviour change is a broad definition and open to interpretation by different people. But in short, the LTP climate action package is subject to proposed budget cuts. The climate action targeted rate is not. The climate action targeted rate, there is a proposal to reprioritise some of the bus services in terms of next financial year to ensure that delays to bus services are enabling other services to be brought online. But that's the total funding for the climate action targeted rate is not currently subject to change.
Right, thank you. This one's from Carlton Buckley for Grace. I understand LGNZ have recognised the need for repeatable emissions measurements, forecasting and reporting, tools for determining embedded emissions and district or regional target setting. Has there been any development in this area?
Yeah, thank you. Look, that's something that we will probably look to do some more work around as we ramp up our work in the climate change space. But LGNZ does actually have a commercial equip, and our team there have been working with a number of councils around a carbon portal that provides a tool to allow embedded carbon to be measured and monitored across any capital works program, so that the councils that are using that tool are accounting and reducing carbon emissions generated from water, transport and infrastructure projects. But what I would say is, yeah, it's very much an area for us to ramp up our work in.
You're on mute, Nadine.
Did it? Always happens once to someone. There we go. This one's for Alison. How can we support our local government politicians to be making good decisions about climate change adaptation and mitigation?
Local government elected officials are very open to community feedback, and I think one of the most powerful ways you can contribute is to register for public participation at a meeting. It's really helpful for elected members to hear directly from members of their constituency on the issues that are important to them. Submissions are good, but turning up in person really shows that you care. You can get a 10-minute slot at almost any meeting, and I think that that's probably one of the most powerful ways that you can influence a politician, other than calling them, writing them, bumping into them at a public speaking event.
Alison, we'll go to 2 more questions. Grace, this one's for you. It's from Patricia Scott. She says, I am part of a local community NGO with several social enterprises and projects whose focus is on community resilience. Does LGNZ have plans for council to work with local communities on community resilience with reference to food security, energy security, and strengthening local economies?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I mean, look, I guess what LGNZ's role is to be encouraging our member councils to be doing this sort of thing. So there will be councils across the country I'm sure that are focusing on this and doing this, but yeah, really the role for LGNZ is to encourage that. I know we did some work a number of years ago, sort of looking at the way that councils were engaging with communities on options for addressing climate change, and that included looking at some of the work that the team down in Dunedin, for example, were doing to engage with a number of NGOs and community groups. So we're constantly, keen to find ways to encourage that and to share best practice examples of that sort of engagement with communities. We think that is really critical and actually makes the decisions that councils are making better ones. But I think, that's something that, again, we will continue to promote more as we ramp up our work in this space.
Beautiful. And just building on that, and final question again for you, Grace, is how is LGNZ working with the government, specifically on its climate change work programs, and what sort of room to grow in that space?
Yeah, look, we are engaging quite a bit at the moment around a number of things. So the broad resource management reform program that's going on, that obviously has a number of climate change focused components to it. We're working with MFE officials around the development of the Climate Adaptation Act, although what I would say is that the key message we're actually having to relay a lot of the time is the need for central government to be working with local government in a much more, a really close partnership kind of way, given it will be local government that's doing a lot of the implementation of this stuff. So that we do feel, that's a message we're really repeatedly having to push. I see too, there's been some questions around sort of the role that LGNZ is playing around all of the recovery work that's going on in light of the recent weather events. And I know that there are some appointments to various panels and working groups and things being worked through right now. And, again, we're really emphasising the importance of local government representation on those different groups. So there is lots of conversation and lots of work going on, but, to your point around the room for growth, I think, it is actually central government recognising the need to partner with local government in this space in a really genuine and meaningful way.
Brilliant. Thank you, Grace. At 1:02, I do bring this webinar to a close. That's it for today, everyone. A huge thank you to Grace, Matthew and Alison, who are just doing such good work in this space. This webinar will be available online in the coming days, so keep an eye out for that if you'd like to pass this korero on to your colleagues. Thank you all for coming along. I think that was a really stimulating discussion and there was a lot to learn and get across there. So thanks for sticking with us. See you next time.